In this day and age, the world is losing Christianity. The light on the hill doesn't seem to be shining so bright anymore. Many believe that Christianity is fading out because there was nothing to it to begin with. But those who are faithful know that the lack of belief is due to a lukewarmness that has taken over Christians and Catholics. St. Pius says, "All the evils of the world are due to lukewarm Catholics." Yes, the blame is on us. How do we get this turned around? How do we normalize Christianity and make God present to others in our everyday life? How do we show others that God exists in our world, that all hope is not lost? Well, we do as Blessed Carlo Acutis did. That is, soon to be Saint Carlo Acutis. Carlo is the example to us today to show us that it's very possible to live a fervent and holy life despite the distractions and gadgets of the modern world that we live in. His secret to holiness was to never put comforts or convenience before God. "Not I, but God," he would often say. At the same time, he understood that he lived in a life of high technology and that it was part of the world that he lived in, and so it couldn't be avoided. In fact, he saw technology as a gift from God and believed it was good to put it to use. He himself believed that everyone needs to know how to use a computer. Otherwise, they isolate themselves from the world that they live in and become unhireable in the workplace. But he didn't let it take over his life or distract him from his duties as a son, student, or friend, and most of all, a Christian. For example, he played computer games, but limited his game time to just 1 hour a week or 10 minutes a day. This came about when Carlo had invited his friends over to play video games one day, and he was shocked to see how the video games changed his friends into being angry and argumentative with each other. He realized how cautious a person needs to be when playing video games, as it can quickly enslave a person. But let's now start at the beginning of Carlo's story. He was born on May 3, 1991, to Andrea Acutis and Antonia Salzano. He was an only child, although his parents desired to have more children, but were unable to conceive. Carlo's family was very prominent and wealthy, working in the insurance industry. Although neither of Carlos's parents was very religious, they had him baptized. They moved to Milan a few months after his birth, and while both parents worked, Carlo was taken care of by a nanny. One of his nannies, who felt that he was too easygoing and timid around children who pushed him around, wanted him to stand up for himself when she heard that he was being bullied. But Carlo wasn't timid at all. In fact, as he grew older, he would prove that by standing up for those who were teased or bullied all the time. But as a little child, he would answer this nanny that he didn't want to be mean to the other children because Jesus wouldn't be happy if I lost my temper. Later, a friend of Carlo's said, "I remember that whenever other kids would threaten him in some way, he would never react violently. We would get mad at him because we thought he should threaten them back, but there was no way of convincing him." Carlo was naturally very good, kind, and generous by nature. It's not certain how he developed such a Christian attitude since his parents weren't practicing their faith or going to Mass at the time, although that did change later on. It's said that at least one of his nannies was Catholic and that she would answer his questions about the Catholic faith. Carlo also asked his mother and father about the Catholic faith. He also bugged them about taking him to church and insisted that whenever they passed by a church, that they go inside to say hello to Jesus. His questions and curiosity prompted them to take him to Mass in order to answer all his questions. It could be said that Carlo's mother and father were his first converts. This is also true of their hired hand, Rajesh, who was a Hindu immigrant. Carlo's enthusiasm for his love for God compelled Rajesh to want to be baptized. Rajesh said, "Carlo said that I would have a happier future if I grew close to Jesus, and he often taught me with scripture, the catechism, and stories about the saints. He practically knew the catechism of the Catholic Church by heart, and his explanations were so brilliant that he was able to get me very excited about the importance of the sacraments. He had a talent for explaining theological concepts in a way that not even adults could explain." People think that only certain people are supposed to bring people back to the church, but every Christian is called to do this. It's no secret how to go about this. The only thing that makes Carlo unique is that he took to heart to let his light shine on a hill. Carlo never put his light on the bottom of the hill. He put it on the top for all to see. He never put on airs or pretended to be holier than he was. He was a normal boy who enjoyed doing boy things, riding his bike, hanging out with his friends, playing video games. But he was serious about his faith and lived it intentionally. He didn't snuff out his light around those who might ridicule him. He lived his faith as boldly as those who boldly live a life filled with bad habits and sin. When Carlo was about 4 years old, his grandfather, who had passed away, came to see him a few weeks after his death. He explained to him that he was in purgatory and needed prayers and a mass said. The next morning, he told his grandmother, who was watching him, that he wanted to go to mass. When she asked him why, he told her that his grandfather needed him to. Even at a young age, Carlo had a deep devotion for Our Lady. When he was 5 years old, he went on a pilgrimage to Our Lady of Pompeii. His nanny, who had come along, says, "His spirituality was certainly saintly because it is hard to find a kid his age who goes to Mass and prays the Rosary every day." We could see the deep devotion he had for Our Lady. He even made a special consecration of himself to Our Lady of the Rosary in Pompeii, after which we joined him in praying the Rosary in front of the miraculous image of the Holy Virgin. In school, Carlo was cheerful and friendly to everyone. He helped kids with their homework if they needed it, and sought out shy children who had no one to talk to or sit with. One teacher recalls how he spent the break time by wandering around the halls, looking for kids standing alone so they wouldn't have the embarrassment or anxiety of having no one to talk to. It didn't matter who the kids were, what race or gender they were, or how rich or poor they were. He always looked for Jesus in their hearts. As said before, he wasn't afraid to stand up to kids who bullied other kids. This would often make the harassers target Carlo, but this didn't stop him from doing what he knew was right. He stood up for disabled children who were made fun of, and he stood up for another student from India who was made fun of for wearing her sari. He would even stand up for girls who were whistled at or jeered at inappropriately, and he would reproach the boys who would do so. The girls were appreciative of Carlo's defense, and many noticed that he was not only good-looking, but that he was everything they would want in a friend or a boyfriend. Many girls pursued him, and although he would always offer his friendship, he never encouraged a relationship of any kind. He would say to his mother, "Our Lady is the only lady in my life." Not that he didn't want to get married later in life. It's said that he hoped to become a chef, but he realized that he was too young for any kind of serious relationship with a girl. He also saw how many of his friends went down a bad road by giving in to their passions. Speaking of passions, Carlo struggled with his own weaknesses like anyone else. Two of them that were particularly difficult for him was talking too much and eating too much. Instead of becoming discouraged, he used these weaknesses to mortify himself and make atonement for sin. For example, he would give up one of his very favorite snacks, Nutella, as self-mortification and atonement for sins. He was very inspired about how the seers of Fatima would often make little sacrifices for sinners, and he did his best to imitate them. Carlo wanted to connect with everyone. He wanted each person he encountered to know that that person was loved by God. He was very friendly with custodians, and especially those who were immigrants. The custodians were always surprised that a kid from Carlo's station in life, and as wealthy as he was, would take the time to talk to them. But Carlo didn't care about wealth or money. In fact, he was often teased about his clothes, which were lacking in the latest fashion. He abhorred fads or trends or anything to do with consumerism. He was a very old soul in that way, and preferred to keep things simple. His friends had a hard time understanding how Carlo didn't take advantage of his social status or wealth by going on expensive and exotic vacations. Instead, he preferred to go to Lourdes or Assisi. He had a very special love for Saint Francis of Assisi and enjoyed going to his shrine whenever he could. In fact, he and his parents visited Assisi so often that they bought a second house there. Like Saint Francis of Assisi, Carlo loved anything that was poor and small. Although he had his group of friends his own age, he would often play with little kids that lived near his grandmother. He also had a great love for animals. He couldn't stand to see any animal suffering, not even little insects that were drowning in the local pool. One of the pool workers, who of course Carlo befriended, was often amazed by how much time and effort he took in saving the little insects as they were cleaning the pool. He especially loved cats, dogs, and goldfish. If he ever encountered a stray dog in the streets, he would beg his parents to let him keep it. He had 4 dogs of his own, and he would often make short videos in which dogs would be the stars. One of his more memorable videos features Carlo as the evil general commanding his army of dogs as they tried to conquer the world of the monster cat, Cleo. Everyone enjoyed Carlo's short films as they were very funny and very entertaining. Carlo also had a great love for the poor. He would often stop to talk and visit with them. Many times he would give them his allowance, and in the evening he would make snacks to give to the poor. He even asked his mother to let him work at a restaurant as a server so that he could buy sleeping bags for the homeless. It goes without saying that along with his love for the poor, he also loved the poor souls in purgatory. He would pray for them often, especially during the consecration at Mass. He would use this sacred moment not just for the poor souls, but for any intention or specific grace. He would say, "Who can intercede more for us than a God who offers himself to God?" During the consecration, we must beg God the Father for grace through the merits of his only Son, Jesus Christ, his holy wounds, his most precious blood, and through the tears and sorrows of the Virgin Mary, who, as his mother, intercedes for us more than anyone else. Carlo, too, spent hours in front of Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament. His spiritual director also testifies this by saying, "He went to Eucharistic adoration several times a week, and every time I met him, he would tell me of the advances he had made through this practice. He told me he had made a lot of progress in Eucharistic adoration. He explained that he was finally able to remain undistracted during adoration, and that, thanks to his time in adoration, his love for the Lord had grown enormously." A good deal of Carlo's time in adoration was spent praying for sinners and the poor souls in purgatory. He would do whatever he could for anyone who was suffering. One time, someone told him that by praying for at least a half an hour in front of the Eucharist, he could obtain a plenary indulgence from the Church under the usual conditions. He used this prayer time to help the poor souls with these indulgences. Through the revelations of Fatima and Saint Faustina, he developed a holy fear of hell. He said, "I marvel that hardly anyone ever talks about hell, because it is such a terrible and frightening reality. It sends shivers down my spine just thinking about it." Of course, Carlo's holiness would be nothing without the Holy Eucharist. He attended daily Mass, and it's said that for the few times he couldn't go, that would be the only time he would pout. Carlo was often amazed that more people didn't go to daily Mass. He realized that this was due to a spiritual apathy that led to an unawareness of Jesus in the Eucharist. He would say, "I think that many people do not fully understand the value of the Mass, because if they recognize the enormous blessing we have in a Lord who gives himself as our food and drink, they would go to Mass every day to participate in the fruits of the sacrifice and let go of so many superfluous things." After receiving communion, Carlo would pray, "Jesus, make yourself at home. Live within me as if it were your own dwelling." He also said, "You can go straight to heaven if you avail yourself of the Eucharist every day." And probably one of his most striking quotes is, "When we face the sun, we get a tan. When we face Jesus in the Eucharist, we become saints." His great love for Jesus in the Eucharist and his fascination with stories of Eucharistic miracles compelled him to want to share these stories with everyone. He was convinced that if more people heard about the Eucharistic miracles, that they would be motivated to learn more about our Eucharistic Lord. He was especially grieved by the words that Jesus told Blessed Alexandrina, who lived on the Eucharist alone. "I put you in the world, and I am allowing you to subsist only on me, to prove to the world the infinite worth of the Eucharist and what it means for me to live in souls. It is a light of salvation for all humanity. I have been so forgotten. Indeed, I am offended. I wish to be loved in the Holy Eucharist. It is the source of all grace." To help spread devotion to the Eucharist, Carlo put his talents for technology to use and created a website dedicated to approved Eucharistic miracles around the world. He also documented approved Marian apparitions. All of this was in the hope of drawing people to the shrines of these holy places, to rekindle in them a lost flame of faith. He worked on the website for 3 years, and it was published on the feast of St. Francis of Assisi, only 4 days before Carlo's death. Upon his research, he asked and begged his parents to take him to the shrines of approved miracles. Then he would catalog all the information that he learned. This would eventually become his famous website. In the beginning of October of 2006, Carlo came down with what his parents thought was the flu. When it didn't subside, he was admitted to the hospital where he received the diagnosis of M3 type leukemia, a rare and very serious type of cancer. Carlo received this diagnosis 1 week before he died. He received the news very calmly, saying, "The Lord has given me a wake-up call." From there, things happened very fast. He was transferred to the ICU where treatment began. Although Carlo's parents hoped for a cure, Carlo knew it wasn't to be. He told his mother, "I would like to leave this hospital, but I know I will not do so alive. I will give you signs, though, that I am with God." Carlo offered all his sufferings for the Pope's intention and for the Church. His sufferings were many. One of them was that he had to wear a plastic helmet on his head to help with his breathing. This helmet was very uncomfortable and made breathing very difficult because whenever he coughed, he was unable to expel his mucus. It caused him to stay awake even during the night, and he anxiously waited for his mother to come back in the morning to sit with him. She wasn't allowed to stay at his bedside during the night, but had slept in the waiting room. Later, although she stayed in his room, he asked the nurses not to wake her because she needed her rest. Although the helmet caused some anxiety, Carlo was patient and accepting of his sufferings. His legs and arms swelled twice their normal size, which must have caused a lot of pain, but he never complained or let on that he was hurting. When asked how he was doing, he would simply answer, "There are a lot of other people suffering more than me." He always had a smile on his face. One doctor, who worked briefly with Carlo, was struck by his countenance. He said, "In a small room at the end of the corridor, I found myself in front of a boy. His pale but serene face surprised me, unthinkable in a seriously ill person, especially an adolescent. I was also amazed by the composure and devotion with which, albeit with difficulty, he received the 2 sacraments. He seemed to have been waiting for them and felt the need for them." Carlo was content with his sickness and that he was facing death. He explained his reason for his tranquility to his mother. "I am dying peacefully because I have lived my life without wasting a single minute of it in things that displease God." Carlo received the sacraments of the sick, which gave him much comfort. Near the end of the week, the nurses were putting Carlo into his protective suit for another procedure. The doctor asked Carlo how he was doing, and as always, he responded, "Well." But a half hour later, he fell into a coma. They gave him a special blood transfusion to separate his red blood cells from his white blood cells. The procedure went well, but sadly, he suffered a cerebral hemorrhage. The doctors declared him brain dead, and the next day, his heart stopped beating on its own, although he was still on a respirator. It was October 12th. He was 15 years old. His body was brought home, where all the people who Carlo ministered to paid their respects and said their goodbyes to the boy who made them feel noticed and loved. His final wish was to be buried in his favorite city, Assisi. This wish was granted on April 6, 2009. On October 10, 2020, Carlo Acutis was declared blessed. On May 23, 2024, Pope Francis recognized a sacred miracle through Carlo's intercession. His canonization will happen at some time in 2025, although an official date hasn't been set yet. Carlo had told his parents that he would send her a sign to let her know that he was well and in heaven with Jesus. 4 years after his death, at the age of 44, his mother became pregnant with twins. Carlo's path to holiness was simply becoming so close to Jesus that others were drawn to him. He went to Mass every day and confession every week. He had a simple but deep prayer life. He involved God in everything in his life. More than that, he wasn't afraid to be authentically Catholic to the world. We too can strive for this by simply saying our prayers in public when eating, making the sign of the cross openly, and talking about our love for God with no fear or embarrassment. Let us normalize Christianity again and put our light on top of the hill for all to see. Blessed Carlo Acutis, soon to be saint, pray for us.